With the release of Thor Love and Thunder, I figured it'd be the perfect time to stop and rank all of the 4 Thor movies from the worst to the best. Let's get started. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben, and on this channel I love to talk about movies and TV, and if you also love to talk about movies and TV, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Basically, for this video, I'm just going to be ranking all the 4 Thor movies. That includes Thor, Thor the Dark World, Thor Ragnarok, and Thor Love and Thunder. Make sure to let me know down below in the comment section what is your ranking of all the 4 movies. I would love to see your list, and let's get started. I do want to say that the bottom 2 of my list are pretty neck and neck, and the top 2 are pretty neck and neck. But coming in last place, though I said that it's neck and neck with the one above it, is Thor the Dark World. A lot of people title this as the worst MCU movie, and while I would need a rewatch to solidify my thoughts on all of the movies and where each of them rank, I do think this is an incredibly disposable movie. I don't think it's complete and utter garbage, it's very watchable, but like I mentioned, with it being disposable, you're gonna watch it and then you're gonna forget a lot about it. The positives, there are enjoyable action sequences, and especially when comparing it to the original Thor, there are much more action sequences in this one. That makes it flow more smoothly and the movie feels quicker. The chemistry between Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth is a standout. They had that brotherly dynamic. Both of them work off of each other very well, and they're both perfectly cast and each of them fit their individual roles perfectly. But there are so many exposition dumps. Yes, you're gonna have them in big movies, big budget movies that have a big spectacle. But here I just became more and more aware of them. I was like, you're doing a lot of just dumping of exposition. Malekith, who is a villain that you will definitely forget about. Even his name I actually had to look up. He is one of the weakest, if not the weakest, MCU villain. And here's where the MCU comedic moments I felt they definitely got in the way. Which is interesting because this was just as they were getting into phase 2. They were finding their footing and each movie would now have these comedic moments, and they still have them to this day. But man, they just get in the way and they aren't funny. Especially the stuff with Darcy and her stupid intern guy. Like, what are they doing? You can take them completely out of the movie. It would have no effect on the rest of the movie. It's just aggressively mediocre. Again, watchable, but it's not one that you want to go rewatch for sure. And it's just below the number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Thor from 2011. It's kind of a shame that the first Thor movie is a bit of a stinker. Don't get me wrong, the direction from Kenneth Branagh is great. Aside from the aggressive amount of Dutch angles, we won't talk about that. It is one of the better directed MCU films. Branagh just does a great job of capturing these large scale sequences. And in the intimate moments as well on Earth, they're enjoyable. The visuals are very impressive, especially for the time they aged pretty well. And you'll hear me talk about this actress a lot in this video, but Natalie Portman, who, if you don't know, is arguably my favorite actress ever. She is so damn charming in this movie. This is like peak Natalie Portman, and she was the big highlight for me. But the entire cast as well is pretty good. Hemsworth and Hiddleston in particular are finding their footing. They haven't really completely captured the role of Thor and Loki, but of course as it went on, they fit more and more into the roles. But when talking about the character of Thor, he is just arrogant and cocky, which makes him very unlikable for a big chunk of this movie. He has a redemption arc and it's solid, and you definitely grow to enjoy him more, and I'll even talk about where I finally became to love the character later in the list. I think Hemsworth plays that role well, but it's hard to root for your titular character. And the movie is just pretty dull. There's not much about it that stands out, and when you have a movie that is kind of just plopped right into this big universe amongst almost 30 movies, you want to have memorable and rewatchable movies. This one is not that. It's tonally inconsistent, the mixture of fish out of water story and dark Asgardian mythology doesn't mix. How they mixed it together just feels odd and it doesn't flow. And other than that, the movie just slows down heavily in the middle. Once you're on Earth with Thor and he's exploring, the movie just gets dragged out. Very similar to The Dark World. While it's not a complete and utter failure, I think it's, again, a watchable movie, but just not a memorable one, and not that I want to go back to revisit. But on the flip side, you get to my number 2, which is Thor Ragnarok. Like I mentioned, it is very close to Thor Love and Thunder. Over time, I think the rewatchability factor will play into where they will really stand the test of time. But I talk about having this rewatchability factor, and Thor Ragnarok has that. It is a movie that you can put on and just enjoy it each and every time you rewatch it. And even going deeper than that, it's a movie that is simple to rewatch. You don't need to think too hard about it. It's not a thinking man big epic movie. It is a superhero comedy with the vision of Taika Waititi spilled all over it. It has a drastically different tone, especially when comparing it to the first two movies, but it was a very welcomed new take on the character. Those other movies were fairly dark and kind of brooding, but this one is like a happy Saturday morning cartoon that's just so much fun to enjoy. The comedy, like I've mentioned before, is either going to very much so work for you and you're going to have a fun time with it, laughing along at every joke, or you're going to be on the total other end of it and you're not going to think it's funny at all and the jokes aren't just going to work. And while I'll say those some jokes don't always work, for me, I am just consistently laughing and I found this movie to be pretty funny. Like I mentioned, Taika Waititi puts his stamp all over this movie. The visuals are stunning. It's a colorful movie. It's vibrant. It has life. Korg is an absolute scene stealer. He's one of my favorite MCU sidekicks. Just that kind of humor works for me. And I think Hela is a good villain. She doesn't maybe stand out as much as a Gore the God Butcher, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I think she's really good. I really no complaints. She's definitely better than Malekith. But like I mentioned, this movie is a lot of fun and there are a bunch of sequences that are just so fun to look at and enjoy. They're big sequences like the Immigrant Song. I mean, first off, what a way to start a movie. Then you also have the Battle of the Champions with Thor and Hulk dueling. The line, "We know each other. He's a friend from work," is just so memorable. And this movie totally reinvents the character of Thor, but it's a very welcome change, like I mentioned. It's for the better. The Thor character needed some revitalization. Especially after talking about the first two Thor movies, those movies just didn't work for a majority of the audiences, and critics as well. And I think Taika was just the perfect director to bring in and give this character some new life. So all in all, this one is just an absolute blast, but I'll talk about why it's just below my number one in a second. But coming in first place is the newly released Thor Love and Thunder. Now, if you want to hear my full, in-depth thoughts about this movie, I'll leave my video review linked right up above. But like I was alluding to, this movie falls just short of Thor Ragnarok because Thor Ragnarok is a very much so just a comedy. Thor Love and Thunder, what it brings is both comedy and heart. It's a very silly movie, don't get me wrong, but it also has a very grounded story, which I won't get into if you still haven't seen it. I won't get into specifics about different plot beats and how stuff plays out, but the relationships and the character development, here it feels more serious and it takes itself more seriously than Thor Ragnarok, which is just a straight up silly fun time. Again, this movie has that. If you're looking for another really fun time, you're gonna get it in Thor Love and Thunder. Both of these movies are total blasts, but Thor Love and Thunder just tells a more compelling story. But aside from that, you have the very welcomed return of Natalie Portman, who, like I mentioned, I just love. She is superb. And I finally loved the character of Thor in this movie. After watching it, I was like, yes, I finally get this character. I finally enjoy watching him, and I'm looking forward to the future of his character. Because before, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, he's a good character. I don't mind him. There wasn't necessarily wrong with his character, but he never stood out. And that might have to do with there being so many memorable original Avengers. But I do think now, because of the route that they have taken the character, what Taika has done, reinventing it, it just works for me. Christian Bale as Thor the God Butcher is terrifying. You will be on the edge of your seat whenever he is on screen. There are some creepy elements to this movie. It has a couple of jump scares, actually. It's a movie that plays with all of your emotions. You're scared at times, like I mentioned. You are laughing. You are tearing up. You're riveted, you're on the edge of your seat in these action sequences. The big emotional weight from this movie is that connection between Thor and Jane, the relationship that they build in this movie. It's really sweet stuff. Tessa Thompson too, who is a character that, again, I've never loved, but she hasn't really stood out to me. She finally stood out here. She gets a nice arc and more depth, and I enjoyed that. And then, of course, you have Korg, who is just awesome. But also the Screaming Goats, they were incredible. I don't think it's a perfect movie by any means. There are some issues, and maybe this one will go down and rewatch. But as of right now, it comes in at number 1. But guys, that is it for my ranking of all the 4 Thor movies. Again, make sure to let me know down below in the comment section what is your ranking of all the 4 movies. I want to hear all of that and more. And if you did enjoy this video, consider giving it a like, as well as subscribing and hitting that notification bell to be notified whenever new videos like this go live. As always, look forward to a bunch more videos coming soon. My name is Ben, people call me Leader, and I'll see you guys in the next one.